Hi, I'm Richard Ashworth. I'm here to talk to you today about Hexagram 52, and in particular, what it might mean if you've cast this hexagram today. And recommend that you treat this moment as if you have actually cast it, because coming across me like this is just as valid a way of coming across a hexagram as any other. Second reason I'm recording these things, I am working through the hexagrams in the order in which they appear in the calendar. And this is a hexagram for October 2025, mountain over mountain. Again, standing still, stand still. I'm working through them over a period of probably 8 years. You can join the classes in which I go into this, give you my 5 bobs worth if you like, at a year at a time, or you can watch out for these on my YouTube channel. So first reason, if you cast this, here's some ideas of what it might mean for you, which is something like a dead end, but I'm spoiler alert. Um, Secondly, to see how we can tease out of it the kind of eternal truths that are always in these hexagrams. And thirdly, to look at how it relates to today. So the place to start probably is to actually have a look at the hexagram itself. So let's have a look at it. Here it is. And you can see a hexagram, 6-line figure, consists of two 3-line figures, and these are called mountain. You can see they look like mountains, don't they? With this yang line across the top and these yin lines underneath. We've got two mountains, which is you might think of as great protection. You might think of as a huge barrier. Possibly both things. If you have cast this hexagram, you are quite likely to be facing a brick wall. You're quite likely to be in a situation where a method that has been working for you for a while is no longer working, where you've reached a dead end in a particular project, where you have a choice between banging your head against that brick wall or various other alternatives, which we will talk about. And line by line, what I'll hope to do is to give you some idea of what you might be doing with it. So here's the structure briefly, mountain over mountain. Relates to the third sun, which might mean something. Third son or a very small boy. So there may be some aspect of that in your particular circumstances. The balance is two yang lines, as you can see, and four yin, so it's somewhat out of balance. Correspondence, none. I'm not going to go into that, but it means it's someone who is not really asking for help in the way that they might. This relates actually to the month of the pig, and the pig is very poor at asking for help. Pigs tend to look very, very capable, and then suddenly they're not, and nobody realized. The host or ruler is the 6th line at the top. The 6th line represents very often um, spiritual practice, ideology, things that are not political or to do with daily activity. And the 6th line is usually the best line, the most useful line, or the most typical. So you can make up your mind which of those it is. The Chinese character is a staring eye or a footprint. Interestingly, because a staring eye, like the eye of Sauron or Big Brother in 1984, is a part of the imagery of this being stuck. It does appear to be talking about exactly what's happening in the world at the moment. It's suggesting that there is a huge stuckness going on here where we are, in danger of destroying the planet. And how we avoid that and also, have a reasonable kind of life is one of the big questions of today. Um, so there's the hexagram. Let's come out of that. And let's come out of that. Thank you. Um, and let's talk a bit more about it. In terms of the world, are we living in George Orwell's 1984, where we are, in a state of perpetual war and being told self-contradictory, news all the time? I leave you to decide about that. Are we in Aldous Huxley's Brave New World, where, everybody is comfortable, but life has kind of lost meaning? Are we perhaps in E.M. Forster's The Machine Stops, where everybody is sealed away in a nice little cell, and everyone's got, TV and everything, plenty of food and everything, and so on and so forth. But no real interaction, no real life, no real society, no kind of, interaction, no novelty, just um comfort in a rather cloying kind of way while an elite is running the world. The one I often think about is a novel by Philip K. Dick called The Penultimate Truth, where um, the Armageddon has come. The huge war that blasts everything apart has happened, but human beings have been put away. This metaphor repeats itself in all of these ideas in little rooms under the ground, and they have TV and takeaways and that kind of stuff, computer games, endless Netflix, um, on the idea that there was war raging above them. And at some point, several decades into it, somebody decides to go and see whether the war is still going on, and they find out that it's not going on. But there's a small group of people who've been living high on top of the earth in the sunshine ever since war was declared, but most people are underneath the ground. Not involved in that, which is kind of a bit of a nightmare. In the real world, the narrative has arrived, you might say, at hexagram 52, and I've had 5 or 6 goes at recording this. It has been very hard for me to put together the words in a way that are not extreme, also that are tedious, but that are, you know, enlightening, engaging, and perceptive. But I have been, as I say, thinking about this hexagram a long time. And I think it is the culmination of a group of hexagrams, starting with hexagram 46, which you might trace over the last 6 months, the last 6 years, the last 60 years. That's not really of importance, but the sequence is a logical sequence starting from hexagram 46, um, Sheng ascending, which is Earth over Wind, which speaks of ambition. So it's about ambition, but it's about the trap of ambition. It's about ambition where work-life balance disappears, where there is nobody who doesn't go out to work, where, you know, we are asked to be mindful in order to do meaningless jobs for people who don't care very much. And it's the situation where we are dealing with our emails on a Saturday morning and our WhatsApp group is perpetually open. That's hexagram 46, which leads perhaps to hexagram 47, which is exhaustion. It is lake over water, so it's voluntary exhaustion. If you can see this, hexagram 60, hexagram 60, GA restriction is water over lake. In other words, the big body of water has swamped the little body of water that, you know, the person involved didn't choose for it to be this way. But lake over water, number 47, is we've chosen this, we've chosen to pursue ambition, and we found ourselves in this kind of trap. 40 hexagram 48 is Jing, which is sometimes called the well, but is really about access to the well. It's about resources, whether we're talking about our resources of joy, of happiness, of contemplation, of interaction, of love, all sorts of stuff, or whether we're talking about natural resources, water and light and food and so on and so forth. This suggests that this process of perhaps fatuous ambition leads to the destruction of the world, leads to the failure to respect our own resources, leads us to a point where life gets kind of empty, and we have perhaps come to a brick wall, and we have to choose what we're going to do next. And what I want to say, this may sound very negative and very, very, very pessimistic, but I'm not saying that. What I'm saying is that this is the process, and we're in that process, and we can perhaps do something about it. And you're entitled to disagree if you like. Um, so hexagram 49, sometimes called reform, sometimes called revolution, speaks of some kind of resistance to the status quo. And it brings us to hexagram 50, which is Ding, the cauldron, which is traditionally about change of dynasty. So it speaks of the whole um, power structure changing, which brings us to hexagram 51, which is Chun, thunder over thunder, everything happening everywhere all at once, which finally brings us to hexagram 52, which is stillness. So whether you see it in that historical or political sense, or whether you see it in your own life, this is speaking of a sequence where we have perhaps made choices that have brought us to the point where there is a dead end, where the way we are operating now does not work. And obviously, when I um, study these things, I look at my own situation, and in relation to um, working through the hexagrams, it makes me consider whether it is a worthwhile project, whether I'm making sense, whether this is of any use. But if I go through the hexagram line by line, the very least I can do is to tell you where it seems to me the escape routes are. So let's do that. So um, the text of the whole um, hexagram, I almost call it a bazi then, a hexagram, is stilled his back, freed of his body, walking in his courtyard, unseen his prison, no error. So it's suggesting that there's something about stillness and contemplation and being aware of the moment. Alfred Huang, whose Book of Changes, his what's it called? The Complete I Ching? Complete, yeah, Complete I Ching, I think. He says, keeping still prepares one's mind and spirit to progress when the time comes. Leonard Cohen says, I've seen the future and it's murder. So the only constant is change, and absolute stillness cannot last. So these two mountains are a blockage, but also a place of safety, you might say. And so if we look at the lines one by one, um, referencing someone nothing to do with the Book of Changes, Tom Gunn, who I think was very familiar with this stuff. He was an English poet who was working in California from the early 1960s, so he would have been familiar with people like Alan Watts and Ken Kesey and those guys. He said in his poem, "The sense of movement, one is always nearer by not keeping still." Discuss. So line one, what we're going to do is go up through the body, noticing the stillness, the appropriateness of stillness in some cases, but the inappropriateness in others. So in the first line, keeping his toes still, no blame, helpful to be consistent. Now, this line is about being terrified to make a decision. And the situation you are in, the implication is you do need to make some kind of decision. You cannot stay in that position forever. The first, if you change this line, it changes to hexagram 22, adorn, which is mountain over fire, which means that you can take steps to be more comfortable. You can take steps to improve your situation, but broadly, you are stuck there until you make some other kind of decision. So it may be that being in the brick wall, you can go from side to side, but you are still in front of a brick wall. The second line, so we've moved up from the toes now to the calves. And this one speaks of a situation where a decision has been delayed or made, but was wrong either way. Both moving too soon and moving too late are mistakes, but there is regret here in the move that was made, and it implies that someone else suffered because of it. So this may or may not ring true for you, but it speaks of having made a decision which caused damage because you made it at the wrong time, or not having made a decision which made something else not work. And it is a failure to ask for help. And as I said, this hexagram, I think I said, this hexagram relates to the 10th month of Chinese calendar, which is the month of the pig, who finds it very hard to ask for help. And this change is to hexagram 18, gu, poison, which speaks of opening to the possibility of error. It also speaks of going through our stuff. It speaks of dealing with the reservations we've had, and maybe the learnings we've not grounded, and the pain that we may be distracting ourselves from by obsessive work. But it is about opening up to what's really going on with us in order to move on. Line three, keeping his middle still. Now, the middle may mean all sorts of things. Um, Keeping the middle still may speak of celibacy. That's one of the interpretations. But what it is about passion and restlessness. And it's also about irresponsibility. The person in line three is blaming all sorts of other people. They're not taking responsibility for the situation they are in. And while they continue to blame, they will not move. That's line three. And the change, and these changes sometimes are telling you what's going on. Sometimes they're telling you what will happen if you take note. Sometimes they're doing something else. So we can't fall asleep on these and assume that their nuances are all consistent, because they're not. We have to be awake and take responsibility for what we take from this. The change of the third line is to bow hexagram 23 splitting, which speaks of healing but testing. So bow splitting means moving on. So if this is about your work, it suggests that that may be a thing to consider, that you completely change what you're doing. Line four, keeping his trunk still, no error. It suggests it was a good idea to be still here, presumably around the Tian Tian, around the place where we feel. And what it brings to light is that there are, in the fourth line, very often there is like a new verse, if you like, a new position. But when the trigrams are the same, there is no change. And the fourth change, which would take as a recommendation, is to Lu, the traveler, fire over mountain, hexagram 56, a beacon and an example. It suggests that there are new ways to communicate, and it suggests that you may be someone who is being watched, being admired, being mimicked, and that you may need to consider the position you're in relation to how other people react to your example. At the fifth, we have the jaw being still. So this is about how you nourish yourself, but it's also about how you talk. It's about watching your mouth. It's about being sure that what comes out of your mouth is truthful, is healing, is worth expressing. That if we express our feelings, we express them to move through them. And if we express stuckness, it's in order to um, unstick. This is the central path, of course. The fifth line, being in the middle of the top trigram, is a central line. And one thing that's often said to represent this line is the invisible internal movement of meditation. And the change is to hexagram 53, gradual progress, wind over mountain. It might be erosion. It might be about glass ceilings. That might be useful to consider if this is a professional problem you have. If it is a relationship problem, it may be about digging a hole. You know, the difference between a rut and a grave is 6 feet, they say. But it is about variation of the way that you behave. It is about considering new ways to do things. And finally, we come to the top, simple, honest stillness, stillness of the whole. And this may speak at the end of life, attaining our highest by way of considered stillness. It may speak of spiritual practice. It may speak of adherence to spiritual practice being of value in this situation. It may speak of the need to question it. The change is to earth over mountain, Qian hexagram 15, sometimes called humility, sometimes called teamwork. And so if you've cast this hexagram and that's the changing line, this may be about creating a team, valuing a team, involving your team, but opening up to the team. So that's what I suggest may be useful to consider if you've thrown that hexagram today, line by line. Um, and as I say, I think this hexagram speaks very much of what's happening right now in terms of where the world needs to go and where we need to do in order to be happy, healthy, wealthy, purposeful, and fulfilled, which surely is that, some of those things are the point of being alive. This is a point to reconsider. You may need to take a new direction. Um, when you get to a brick wall, my suggestion is you ask for a helicopter. Ask for things to be done through you and for you rather than by you. You are not alone. So that's Hexagram 52. I will look forward to talking to you next month, unless I've decided this is my cue to take a new direction. We'll see. See you then. Bye bye.